Hey guys, hope everything is good. I hope you guys are doing okay and you're safe and your families are okay as well. I know we talked a little bit in the group chat, and I sent you guys an email as well. Hopefully you've read it, and obviously you got the recording from Manage back, so you've seen the work that I posted. Um, we'll kind of talk about that in a second. But yeah, I hope things are well. I hope your Chinese New Year is going well, went well. Um, do kind of give me some feedback on these because I'm not like I don't want to waste your time if it doesn't work for you, and you'd rather do something else. Like I could give you readings, or I don't really know what else to do. But maybe one of your other teachers is doing something really good, and I could do that. Just let me know if this works, and I'll keep doing it. If it doesn't, then we can do something else. It's up to you. I don't really care how we do this. I'm not at school. I'm in Macau, so I don't have everything with me. So like if you're wanting resources and stuff, I don't have it. It's on my hard drive, which I left at school. Luckily, I have my computer, which does have some stuff, but doesn't have everything that I need. So sorry if I'm not able to give you everything if you ask for it, but I will give you what I can if you need it. Luckily, I have the PowerPoints saved so somewhere else. So I have those, and I have the book saved, which I posted online as well for you. So you can read chapter 12 if that helps you as well. We've got Cognity. I'm not currently planning on posting anything on Cognity, but feel free to use it. It's there for you. You can do assignments and everything like that. We're on chapter 12, which actually, let me share this with you. Let me see if this works. That with you. Okay, you should be able to see my computer, hopefully. Okay, so we're using this PowerPoint, which hopefully you've got. Submit on that for you. Okay, we've already done parts of this already, but I thought I'd go quickly through it because I'm going to be using this terminology, and if you don't know it, then it becomes quite difficult. So I know you. Hopefully, you have your notes with you. If you don't have your notes with you, you might want to jot some of this stuff down. Normally, I would kind of walk around and give you guys time to do this. Obviously, I can't really do that. So I'll just kind of go through it at my pace, and then you can pause it if you want and kind of take notes. You can also leave comments if you'd like as well. So feel free to do that as well. Like, feel free to leave comments, and I'll keep track of them and answer them, or someone else can answer them if you want as well. And I might even ask you to do some comments and stuff, just to kind of keep you guys engaged. But try, if you don't have your notes, you might want to take new notes for this chapter, because most likely we'll do the entire chapter through this method. So it would be really helpful if you did jot some stuff down. So we've talked a little bit already about, I'll kind of point with my mouse if that's possible. We've already talked a little bit about public goods. So those are things that in a perfectly free market, they would not be provided. So markets act in their own best interests, and you're not going to provide something that isn't going to make you any money. So we talked about like parks being one of them. You can see the picture of Central Park. So parks wouldn't be provided in a market. So the government uses money that you pay in taxes and provides them, because they do provide a benefit beyond the cost of the park itself. So you build a park, you have healthier citizens, you have better property. You have lots of different things that go along with having a park. So like if you look at the picture, you can see that everything's built around it, and it's because the park adds value to those things. So it creates a benefit beyond the cost. And that's really what we're going to be looking at, is what benefits do these things, what positive could something provide, and then also what negatives could something provide, and how do we measure that within a market. So these are two terms we've already talked about, so I won't go too much into them. They're also in your reading, which I posted on the NTRAC, so you can take a look at that. Mostly the reading is just terms and some examples to kind of help you through it. Use it as you like. I would recommend reading it because I'll reference it throughout the next couple classes. So it's important that you do have it. Hold on one second. Okay, sorry. Let's try this again. Okay, good. Okay. So we've talked about demerit goods and merit goods before. So merit goods are goods that will be underprovided in a free market and under consumed in that said market as well. Public goods are merit goods. So these would be things like medicine or masks, which is a current example, as well, is that you see governments providing masks because they do provide a benefit beyond the cost. So governments will provide things that wouldn't normally be provided. So there's an undersupply of merit goods, which could lead to market failure. And then there's an oversupply of demerit goods, which could also lead to market failure. So this could be things that cause a negative impact. So things like alcohol or cigarettes, these would be demerit goods. And these are going to be over-provided in the market, which you can see here. And then they're going to be over-consumed in a market as well. So the way governments try to fix this is by making them illegal, which sometimes works, or by placing a tax on them, which tends to be the more useful solution. It's worked very well with things like cigarettes. So you place a tax on them, people still consume them, and then you use that money and reinvest that money into education. And then that will then over time slowly get rid of the externality, which is the negative impact on society. We'll actually see this in a graph in a little bit. Some of you may have chosen to do your IAs on this as well, which is perfectly fine. It's a really common topic for IAs because there's a pretty easy graph to use for it. So this is stuff we've already covered. So I used the term externality earlier. An externality is just something that has an impact on someone else. So you're doing something, and then because you've done it, it has a negative impact on someone else. It can be negative, or it can be, I use the word negative because you kind of think about an externality being negative, but it can also be positive. So this could be something like smoking would be a negative externality. But then a positive externality could be education or healthcare. So they kind of go both ways. You tend to see more examples of it being negative, but it is also positive as well. So, okay, so we've covered that, which is why I went so quick. You've actually seen this graph before as well. So these are key terms that you need to know. We've used them before at believe, chapter 3, um, marginal social cost and marginal social benefit. So you'll actually see them here on the supply line and the demand line. And it's just another way of talking about supply and demand. So kind of moving forward, a lot of times when we actually end up talking about supply now, what we're actually talking about is what's called marginal social cost, or the cost to society. And then the demand line turns into what's called marginal social benefit, which is the benefit to society for something. Community surplus is the same thing we've talked about previously. And then community surplus is the makeup of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Producer surplus is above the supply line. The HL students would know this. And then the demand line, below the demand line, is the consumer surplus. So above the supply, below the demand, makes a triangle. So if you're ever, for the HL students, if you're ever asked to find the community surplus, you just use the formula for finding the area of a triangle, 1/2 base times height. So you would go from 0 to A, and then from P to C, and that would give you the area of that triangle, or the same thing true is here as well. This is more stuff we'll do a little bit more practice on in the HL portion. But yeah, so let's move on. Okay, so this is new stuff. So the first one we'll talk about is what's called negative externality of production. Actually, I bought a whiteboard today, so I figured to use it. But this works, and there's not like a massive glare. Looks stupid using a whiteboard. This would be a lot easier in my classroom. But so what we're gonna, it would be really helpful in your notebooks if you actually did this. If you just kind of took a page in your note and just divided it into 4 sections, because there's 4 different parts of this that you'll need to know. There are 4 different types of externalities that we'll talk about. If you remember from my classroom in the back, there's actually big graphs of 4 different things, and it's actually these 4 different externalities. So I divided this up into 4 sections. You've got a positive and a positive and a negative and a negative. So this is, well, I guess we'll start with negative. So negative externality of production down here, which you can see on the screen. And then I'll change it real quick to positive externality of production, which is here. And then negative externality of consumption is there. And then positive externality of consumption is here. So these are the 4 different ones we're going to talk about. The first thing that we want, oh, it's the wrong side. There we go. The first thing that we could look at is a negative externality of production. So I guess in your little box that you've created, you can put, I need the red marker. Okay. So first thing, we're going to define it. So you've got the definition here, which is, in this case, production of something creates a negative impact on a third party. So the making of something creates a negative impact on other people. So usually this is dealing with like actual production, so like pollution. So the next thing I want you to do is put your own example. So if you remember from our talk on paper 1 and the big paper 1 chart I have in my classroom, is that you always need to provide real life examples, especially in part B of paper 1 and question 1. You need to provide real life examples. And that's why we do these things, is so that you you have them. So think of a real life example of negative externality production. The example that we have here is dealing with production of paint. The reason why production of paint could do it, could create a negative externality of production, is because a lot of times factories that produce these things will dump stuff, will dump chemicals, or will dump waste in a way that has a negative impact on the environment. And then if the environment is getting impacted, then it has impacts on everyone else. So you see that in China all the time, that there's pollution from some factory, and then that pollution impacts everyone around the factory. So it's not just the factory, it's everyone else. And the factories don't have to pay for that. There's no cost for them dumping all this waste. Like, they're doing it illegally, there's no cost. And it has an impact. And that's where the market is failing. The market isn't working, which is why this is called market failure. So in this situation, you've got the marginal social benefit line, which is the demand line. And then you've got the supply line into two sections. You've got it in what's called the marginal private cost, and then the marginal social cost. The private cost is the cost to the producers, and that cost is at P1. And then the social cost, which is the cost to society, is at P star. So that gap between P1 and P star that you're seeing, that's what's called welfare loss, which we talked about before. And that gap is the negative externality. So that is a negative impact to society because of the production of paint. So if paint wasn't being produced, there wouldn't be that loss. So what your job is going to be, especially in part B or in your IA, is going to be to solve that externality. So how do we close this gap? How do we get rid of it? How do we move the marginal social cost closer to the private cost? Or how do we move the private cost, which is more likely to happen, up to the social cost? So we have to find a way to shift that line so that it won't be as bad as it currently is. So we can lessen the welfare loss to society because of the production of this paint. And it's important that you understand that this is dealing with not you painting your house, but it's dealing with the actual making of the paint. This is the production of the paint, not the use of the paint. That would be consumption, and that's not what we're talking about yet. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, maybe jot some questions down in the comments and I can try my best to answer them, or someone else can jump in and answer it as well. Okay, so if you don't have this down, you can pause it. If you do, then we're gonna move on. Okay, so got a video here. I'll play it and I can kind of narrate it as we go through.
Let's think about the market for plastic bags. And I'm picking this market in particular because there might be some costs associated with plastic bags that aren't captured when you're only looking at it from the point of view of the suppliers or the consumers. So right over here, you have a demand curve, and that's really the demand coming from the supermarkets. So this is the demand curve. You could also view it as marginal benefit. So that very first bag that gets produced, a supermarket gets a lot of marginal benefit. They'd really want to get that bag because then they could give it to the people who shop at the supermarket and they can carry their bags home. But then each incremental bag after that, the marginal benefit gets lower and lower and lower. And this green curve over here, we've seen this multiple times. That is our supply curve, which we can also think of it as our marginal cost curve to produce that very first bag. The opportunity cost for that very first bag is looks like about a penny per bag, and then it gets higher and higher and higher as we produce more and more bags. And we have an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. Our equilibrium quantity looks like it's about 3.5 million bags. We have an equilibrium price of about 2 cents per bag. And if we just, if this...
So the idea of what he's doing here is important for everyone, but the numbers that he's using is more important for the HL students. So the SL students don't really have to worry about the numbers he's using, just the idea, whereas the HL students are going to need to know all of it. So um, again, you can pause it if you need to. This example that he's using, I've actually found one that's current, and I posted it on ManageBack for you. So you'll actually be kind of using some of the stuff that he's showing you in this, which is your homework. And you need to do it and then email it to me before our next class, excuse me, which is tomorrow, which is Tuesday. So yeah, you need to read this and then just follow the instructions on ManageBack, which say, oh, here it is. Please draw a graph based on what is happening in the article. This is something that you're expected to do in your IA, which you're currently working on, paper 1 and paper 2. It is important skill, obviously. And then when you're finished, you can email it to me, which will be due Tuesday, period 4, which is our next class. So let's go back to this.
For all of the costs and all of the benefits, then this area right over here would show the total, the aggregate total benefit that the ecosystem here, that the suppliers and the consumers, or the supermarkets, or the consumers in this case, are getting from this transaction. Marginal benefit higher than marginal cost, marginal benefit higher than marginal cost. This whole area is our total surplus, and we've seen that multiple times. But now let's think about that added cost that plastic bags have that are not factored in to the costs and the prices, or the costs and the benefits right over here. Plastic bags have a negative externality. Negative externality. There is a cost associated. So it's negative because there's a cost associated with plastic bags that is not being borne by either, in this situation, that is not being factored into the marginal cost curve. You can also have positive externalities, which are a benefit. Maybe you're talking about the market for trees, and society benefits when more plants or more trees are being planted, or whatever. And let's just say, and that negative externality, that's coming from obvious things. These bags are going to be littered. They're going to be on the side of the highway. The city has to clean them up. There's environmental risks due to them. Animals might eat them and choke on them, and turtles might drown, and whatever else, because they're choking on plastic bags and whatever else. And so they hire some experts, and this is not an easy thing to do, but it's determined that the negative externality of these plastic bags is 2 cents per bag. Or another way to think of it, the cost to society and the environment, above and beyond the marginal cost to the producers, is 2 cents per bag. Now, given that, if we assume this statement right over here.
So what he's doing with the actual negative externality cost isn't really something that you'll be asked to do. And if you're asked to do it, they'll give it to you in paper. It'd be in paper 3 for the HL students. I think I've seen it maybe once in a paper, but it doesn't show up much. But if it does, it's pretty simple. You just have to pull the data from the graph and then use it in your calculations. But again, the idea is, and this thing is more important than the actual numbers that he's using.
And it's not an easy thing to come up with this number, but if we assume that this number is true, what then is the optimal amount of bags to purchase? And what are we actually doing what is the optimal amount of bags to produce? And what are we doing when we do produce this much? And to think about that, let's create a new curve. This is a supplier's marginal cost. Let's create another curve that is the supplier plus society's marginal cost. So that first bag, supplier's opportunity cost is about a penny, but for society it's costing another 2 cents. So supplier plus society is costing almost 3 cents. And so we can plot out another curve. Which we can view as the supplier plus society marginal cost. So now we can think of things in terms of total benefit, or total net benefit, I guess, that's happening. That very first bag, the supermarket that buys it is still getting that over 5 cents benefit. But now if we think about the net benefit to society, it's not this whole height all the way down to a penny. It's only this part right over here. It's only the difference between 5 and 3 is the marginal net benefit. If you take the marginal benefit and you subtract out the total marginal cost, including the externalities. And so the next bag, the total cost gets a little higher, the marginal benefit gets a little bit lower, and you keep, it makes sense for society, we'll keep getting benefit from this. If we think of the entire ecosystem, we'll keep getting benefit until we hit this other equilibrium point over here. And once we get past that equilibrium point, now when we think holistically, when we think of the environment and the government and all of that, now all of a sudden the marginal cost of each incremental unit is higher than the marginal benefit. So if we were to produce beyond that, now we're incurring costs. Now we're essentially eating out all of the benefit that we would have gotten. If we were to produce all the way to our old equilibrium point over here, we more, in the way that, look, just eyeballing it, this area is more, the purple area is more than the yellow area. We're now getting a negative total benefit to society, or you could say a negative total surplus. And we haven't visualized it this way in the past. It's unusual for us to see a dead weight loss on this side of the equilibrium point, but you could also view it that way. So this right over here is negative surplus, negative surplus. And so what you really want holistically, if you are the benevolent emperor of the society, and you really want to factor in all of the costs and benefits of the plastic bags, the ideal thing, if you want to optimize the benefit in society, you would want the equilibrium price to be around here. That looks like about 350, and the equilibrium quantity to be, I don't know, this looks about 1.8 million. And you would not want all of this excess quantity that is taking away, that is less efficient for society.
Okay, so he's just talking, the basic idea of what he's talking about is here, this gap between the marginal private cost and the marginal social cost and the externality that is being created because of, in his example, the production and the extra cost to society of the production of those plastic bags. So because there's a problem in society, we then have to find a solution. So, and this would be something that you'd have to do in your solution part of your IA, or in part B of paper 1, or part D of paper 2. And that is finding a way to lessen or get rid of the externality. Now, you can never really get rid of an externality. You can see it here. It's actually called internalizing an externality. You can't really totally internalize it because it's really impossible to know what the cost to society is. So like if you're talking about our example of paint, how do you really know what the cost of the dumping of that paint in the water is? Because you can't figure it out. So usually it's guessing and just trying to find a good guess as to what that cost might be. So why does this happen? Because we're in the free market. So we're in the free market. Firms only take into account their own individual costs of production, the private costs of production. So the government must step in to fix this. Usually it's done through taxation, and it's done on the private costs. So they tax the producers, the production. So they'll tax the producers in this example based on the liters of paint that they're producing, which is going to cause their private cost line or the supply line to shift to the left, which shrinks the welfare loss, because the welfare loss was here at P1 all the way up to P star, and now it's going from P2 to P star. So it's shrinking that externality. So the tax is creating an internalization of the externality, and the burden, the deadweight burden, is being reduced. So the deadweight loss is being reduced. It's not completely going away, but it's shrinking. And then what you do is you use that money to then invest in this case, cleanup measures or education or research into new technologies But you use that money to then invest in other ways to try to help deal with this problem. So back to here, you can see I added an explanation and a diagram. So each 4 of your things that we'll get through, you don't have to do them until we do them together. But at the end, I will ask you to send me a picture of it. So make sure that it is getting done. So you've defined it. You've given me a real life example. You've given me a brief explanation, and then you've diagrammed it. In this situation, you should have at least, at minimum, this diagram here, but probably 2, the first one here, and then this one here in your notes on that 4 squared sheet that we've created. So if it was really easy, externalities would just go away once they're created. So obviously it's not easy. So obviously, how do you know how much tax to put in place? And then how do you know who's polluting? So you look up in the sky out your window and you see that there's a lot of pollution, but you don't really know where that pollution is coming from, and you don't know who's doing what level. So how do you know who to tax? It's difficult because the government is small and there's a lot of private companies, and you don't want to hurt business, but you also don't want to let business get away with hurting the environment or hurting people. So you have to balance it. It's very difficult to do because businesses don't like to be taxed. And if businesses get taxed, that means then the cost of products go up. So then people pay more as well. The government, beyond putting a tax in place, governments could change laws, or governments could create other systems or solutions. One potential solution is what's called cap and trade. I might actually put some notes down to give you a reading on cap and trade at some point. So read on cap and trade was just a potential solution to dealing with pollution. It didn't, well, it works, but it never got put in place. I'll see if I can find a reading that explains it to you guys at some point. The United Nations has actually stepped in. It's actually part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Things with dealing with pollution and working with companies to solve potential pollution issues through creation of new solutions for them. It's ongoing. Obviously, it's difficult, or it would have been done already. So, this would be 5 minutes. I'll actually let you guys watch that one on your own. No, actually, I'll play it. Never mind. I'll play it. We talk about it.
In the last video, we first thought about the externalities, the negative externalities of having plastic bags around. It causes litter, it might damage animals in the environment in some way, and we're assuming, and we assumed in that video, that we were able to calculate the actual external cost of a plastic bag. This 2 cents a bag is the impact on litter and the environment. And then we were able to figure out that if we factor this in, instead of just having the regular marginal cost curve of the suppliers, if we added that marginal cost curve to the external cost, we would get a supplier plus external cost marginal cost curve. And then we get what is actually the optimal price and quantity of plastic bags, so that we actually do not eat into our surplus by creating all of this negative surplus where the total costs of the bags are higher than the total benefit. But one thing that we did not touch on in that video is how does this actually happen? If we didn't, if we just let things be, and we just had the supplier's marginal cost curve, and we have the consumer's demand curve, and in this case, the consumers were the supermarkets, then the equilibrium price that'll be reached will be right over here. Because although we're theoretically saying that there's this cost over here, the cost won't be factored into the markets. So if you are the benevolent emperor in this society, what do you do? What do you do to get the quantity closer to this point right over here than what the equilibrium quantity will be when you don't factor in the external costs? And there's a bunch of options here. You could just ban plastic bags. Ban plastic bags. You could put.
So that was one potential solution. And if you read the article, it talks a little bit about that. And some places have decided to do that as a solution. So the government could step in and just decide to get rid of whatever is causing that negative externality, just ban it altogether. They've done that with plastic. They've done it with straws. They've done it with drugs. But the problem is that if you ban something that's really popular, it could negatively impact you as a politician, or it could create a negative black market situation. Now, I don't think there's a black market for plastic bags, but there is black market for drugs, and as a result of banning drugs, it's created a market for them. So some would argue that instead of banning something, you just regulate it and you tax it, and it would actually create a better solution, because then you could use that tax money to, in this case, maybe clean up the rivers or educate people about why they shouldn't be using them or whatever it is.
Quota on plastic bags. You could put a quota, so saying that more than a certain amount of bags cannot be produced, or you could tax plastic bags, And let's think about which of these will result in the most surplus, the most benefit to society in aggregate. And one core assumption we're going to make is that this is an accurate assessment of the external cost per bag. So if you were to just ban plastic bags as this benevolent emperor, or maybe seemingly or hopefully benevolent emperor of this society right here, if you just banned plastic bags, what would happen? Well, then this market just won't exist. And all of this surplus that could have existed won't exist anymore. So you would actually be destroying surplus. Now, you could say, no, plastic bags are horrible. They should just be outright banned. There's no amount of benefit for which plastic bags are worth using. But in that case, you're actually arguing this point right over here. You'd be arguing that, no, it's not 2 cents a bag, it's 10 cents a bag of negative externality. And because of that, then you would have this curve shift up even more. And then there's no positive quantity there. And then maybe a ban would be all right. But if the 2 cents is the externality, the negative externality, and if you were to ban plastic bags, then you would actually be removing this surplus from society. So that doesn't seem like a good option. Now, what about a quota? You kind of look at the study right over here and you say, look, the optimal amount of plastic bags is 1.9 million bags per week. So I will just say that that's the most that the market can produce. But when you say that, that's assuming that you really do understand what this demand curve looks like.
So quota isn't something we've actually talked about yet. It's just a physical limit on the amount of something that can be produced. Usually when you talk about quotas, you're talking about a limit on the amount that can be brought into a country. So import quotas, in this case, is actually talking about a total production quota. Usually you would see production quotas on things like fishing. So like there are quotas on the amount of fish that fishermen can catch. And it's to control the amount of supply so that you're not overfishing, which we actually get to later. But yeah, so in this case, he's saying that they put a quota up to the amount where there actually is still some benefit to society, and so that there wouldn't be a negative externality created. But what he's about to explain is that that's actually really hard to measure, because how do you really know what those numbers are, like we just talked about previously?
drew a straight line here just out of simplicity, assuming you really do understand what this marginal cost curve looks like. And throughout this playlist, we've been assuming that we kind of do understand those things, but in the real world, it's actually very hard to know exactly what the marginal cost curve looks like, and it's also hard to know exactly what the marginal benefit curve or the demand curve looks like, especially because they're always changing. There's always more competitors, less competitors, more substitute products, more R&D. Things are getting more efficient, less efficient. And so it's very hard to know what the true equilibrium quantity should be. So a quota is difficult. You don't have quite the right information. A tax is interesting because a tax says, look, regardless of what the marginal cost curve really is, we are just going to shift it up by 2 cents. We saw that when we first talked about taxes. And when we first talked about taxes, we talked about, hey, they're introducing a deadweight loss because you're not producing as much quantity as you would have all otherwise, or as much quantity isn't being consumed. But here, a tax could actually prevent a deadweight loss, because if you have a 2-cent tax, essentially adding the cost of the negative externality in the form of a tax on top of the supplier's cost right over here, you are going to cause the equilibrium quantity to be the quantity where you're not generating all of this negative surplus. And it's just a positive side effect. And once again, this is all assuming that this is the right number, but it would be a positive side effect that you would also generate some revenue for the government. And what's good about the tax in this circumstance right over here, you're not assuming anything about what the marginal cost curve looks like or what the demand curve looks like. As long as you're assuming that this is the right number, the tax will always shift whatever the marginal cost curve is. It'll always shift it at the right point to intersect wherever the demand curve is at this equilibrium point that gives us an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. So if this is the right number and you put a 2-cent tax per bag, then this is probably going to be the best option in terms of optimizing the total surplus.
Okay. So what he's talking about is that out of the 3 options he provided, that taxing would be the best solution, because assuming that that externality cost is correct, which it isn't, there's no way for it to be correct. But if it was, that the tax would then result in a reduction, or actually in this case, getting rid of the externality. So taxing does tend to be the best solution, but it's always good to explain the other different solutions in your solution. So in your solution section of your IA, if you're doing this, you need to talk about what other solutions you could have done. Because when you're explaining something, why you made a choice, you have to talk about what the other options you decided not to do were. You can't just say, I chose this one. You have to then explain, well, why didn't you choose, if you chose C, why didn't you choose A or B? What are the negatives of A and B that led you to the point of getting to C? Because if you're able to explain why you didn't choose something, it's going to strengthen the argument of why you chose what you did. So you were expected to do that in a part B of paper 1. You're expected to do that on your IA as well. The problem you're going to run into on your IA is that you only have 750 words to do that. And it's really difficult. But I put some IA stuff on ManagePack for you, which is why I'm talking so much about it in this lesson. But you need to make sure that you are doing this in your IA as well. You also need to make sure you look at that stuff on ManagePack, because I haven't seen a lot of IA work from you. I posted on ManagePack some helpful stuff for the IA by Friday. I actually want you to send me what you have for your IA. It's not your final draft. It's not your final draft. It's not even really your first draft. It's just where you currently are so that I can see it. Because I've seen some articles, I've seen some of you graphing, but I haven't seen a lot. So I want you to use this time this week when you're not working on class stuff to start to work on it. And if you need things from me, if you need me to look at a couple different articles, send it to me. Make sure you've actually read the article before you send it to me. Don't just read the title and say, that's a good article, and send it to me. Actually read the article. Remember, you want an article that's less than a year old, and you want an article that when you copy it into Word, it's about 1 to 2 pages. make sure it's something you understand, make sure it's from a good website. If you have any questions about your IA, just let me know. I think we're in a pretty good spot here. I think we'll stop for now. Stop sharing that. So you've got a couple different things you need to do. So I put the reading from the book on Management for you so you can kind of follow along with what we're doing. I'm assuming most of you don't have your book with you. The PowerPoint is there as well for you. There's a reading I want you to do as well, just to kind of help you through some material. That's your homework. And if you go to the Friday on your calendar from Econ, if you go to Friday, you'll see I wasn't sharing my screen. That doesn't help you. I need to do that again. Sorry. Share. Now I'm sharing my screen. Okay. Yeah. Books attached. PowerPoint's attached. Reading is attached. I want you guys to read about. We'll talk about it next class. Well, we won't really talk about it because you won't be here, but I'll talk about it. There's the homework. If you go to Friday on the calendar, I can't because I haven't saved this yet. But if you go to Friday on the calendar, you can see the IA stuff, and I need some IA work from you guys this week. If you get it to me, then I can give some feedback and stuff like that. So I don't actually know how long this is because I can't see a timer, but I will stop here. I'll post this. Hopefully it works. Feel free to use the comments in the below section so that you can write some notes or send me anything you want or share it with your classmates. That's fine too. If this didn't work for you, please let me know. If it did work for you, let me know. And we can try to make this work. So have a good day. Stay safe. And I will talk to you again, I guess, tomorrow or the next day.